All right, welcome everyone. The committee will now come to order. And I want to thank everyone for joining us here today for a 2022 review of the Farm Bill, Stakeholders, Perspectives on Non-SNAP, USDA Nutrition Programs. Very important hearing. After a brief opening remarks, members will receive the testimony from our witnesses today, and then the hearing will be open for questions. And so let me just start by again saying welcome to all of you. Really appreciate you all coming in and sharing this vital information on our 2022 review of the Farm Bill, Stakeholders' Perspectives on Non-SNAP USDA Nutrition Programs. This hearing is another at the ongoing series of hearings that we are hosting to review the 2018 Farm Bill and prepare for the 2023 Farm Bill. We will receive stakeholder input on USDA's nutrition programs, including in the Farm Bill, other than SNAP, which includes the following food distribution programs. 1, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, better known as Tfab. 2, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program. And 3, the Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations. And our nutrition incentives and food access programs, including the Shoemaker Nutrition Incentives Program, the Seniors Farmers Market Nutrition Program, the Healthy Food and Financing Initiative, and Community Food Projects. So as you can see, we have a lot of ground to cover. These critical anti-hunger nutrition incentive programs work together alongside SNAP to tackle food insecurity from different angles and provide support to millions of Americans, with each also providing positive impacts for both farmers and ranchers, as well as our broader food system. For example, in fiscal year 2020, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, or Tfab, provided 2.2 pounds of USDA foods to emergency food providers like food banks, who use that support to serve more than 60 million Americans, according to Feeding America. An excellent helping hand for our nation's Feeding America. The Seniors Farmers Market Nutrition Program, which provides over 800,000 low-income seniors with coupons each year that they can exchange for fresh fruits, vegetables, herbs, and honey at our farmers' markets. And our newest member, Ms. Capter, a fine representative from Ohio, has been a strong proponent of this program for many years. Thank you, Ms. Capter. And just last week, the Healthy Food Financing Initiative announced its latest round of grants and loans to entities that will offer healthy foods in communities without access to nearby grocery stores and food retailers. These awards will support 134 projects in rural areas, urban areas, and tribal communities in 46 states and territories, including several right in my own home state of Georgia. Because in Ellenwood, Georgia, which is now completely in my district, thanks to the redrawing, I had it before, and now they're bringing it back to me, Ellenwood. And the name of this organization is Atlanta Harvest, an urban farm that provides food to 7 counties in the greater Atlanta region. They just received Healthy Food Financing Initiative, and I'm very glad about that. This funding will expand their market square footage to increase their inventory and a variety of food sold, and they will be able to purchase a hybrid delivery food truck. And Atlanta Harvest is a great example of how our nutrition programs work in concert. And since 2018, they have partnered with Wholesome Wave, Georgia, who happens to be a 2021 GusNIP grantee, and they will provide SNAP recipients 50% of fresh produce. And that was a little bit of just some of the many fantastic programs that we will discuss today. I also have to acknowledge the incredible work that these programs and their grantees and administrators have done during this terrible COVID-19 pandemic. Despite incredible challenges faced, they responded quickly and with great flexibility and be able to continue serving those in need during a particularly difficult time, and we want to say thank you very much. I look forward to discussing these programs and reviewing their relevant provisions in the 2018 Farm Bill so that we can maintain and improve them upon as necessary for our 2023 Farm Bill. So thank you again to the members and witnesses who are joining us today, as well as those who have tuned in and are listening or watching. And I look forward to hearing more today about how we can improve these important programs. And so with that now, I'd like to welcome our distinguished ranking member, my friend, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for any opening remarks that you'd like to give.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, and good morning to our witnesses, and thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us today. First, I want to remind the committee we are again battling record levels of inflation. Consumer prices rose 8.6% in the 12 months ending in May, climbing at the quickest pace since the Carter administration. This administration and my colleagues must rethink regulatory actions and spending proposals because to say our communities are suffering is an understatement. And obviously we see that in the area that we're discussing today, which is the affordability of food. When you look at what the cost of groceries and individual food products have increased and escalated as a part of that. The harsh reality makes today's hearing important, but also a cautionary tale. Each of the programs being discussed today, including the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, and the Food Distribution Program on Indian reservations, round out the nutrition safety net for individuals and communities in need. But it's no wonder participation rates are through the roof. Nutrition distribution and incentive programs are costing billions to operate, and inflated prices are making it harder for providers to provide and recipients to receive. So I do hope today delivers a realistic discussion on how to combat these excessive costs and ensure those in need have access. But more spending and expanded eligibility are not necessarily the answer. Infusing the economy with newly printed money is a reckless plan. Instead, we need to evaluate how to grow our economy naturally through increased labor force participation, addressing our fractured supply chain, and boosting our domestic production. Welcome steps towards less need and reliance on federal aid. Today also presents the opportunity to discuss what is working, what is not, and the statutes guiding each of these programs. Now, I remain troubled that our recent nutrition farm bill related hearings have focused so little on the 2018 Farm Bill, more on where we can increase spending and expanding eligibility and programming. We know for a fact some of the bipartisan ideas that came to fruition in 2018 have cost too much, yielded too few results, or barely made a difference in people's lives. I think also it's imperative that we hear more about nutrition and health today. The recently announced White House Conference on Food, Nutrition, Hunger, and Health advertises itself as an event to accelerate progress and drive significant change to end hunger, improve nutrition and physical activity, reduce diet-related disease, and close the disparities around them. On its face, that mission appears praiseworthy. However, the hearsay surrounding the conference is leaving much to be desired. And lastly, in areas like nutrition incentives, what is being studied and learned related to health outcomes? Are we asking the right questions about their impact? And are the beneficiaries receiving the bulk of the funding, or are we seeing funds tied up by organizations under the guise of, quote, administration, end quote? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing. I look forward to the discussion, and again, I thank our witnesses for their testimony today, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranking Member. And now the chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so that witnesses will be able to begin their testimony and to ensure that there is ample time for questions. And right now, I would like to give a warm welcome to our first witness today, Mr. Kyle Wade, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Atlanta Community Food Bank in our great state of Georgia. And let me just say, I've had a great relationship with this gentleman. We've worked together in many projects for feeding our wonderful people in Georgia and across the nation. And I want to also add that we have done a great project at Mundy's Mill High School where we were able to provide COVID-19 vaccinations. Our next witness today is Mr. Gary Beazall, who is the director of the Menominee Tribal Department of Agriculture and Food Systems, and also the director of the Menominee Tribal Food Distribution Program from Keshnia, Wisconsin. Thank you for coming. Our third witness today is Dr. Jesse Gruner, the Director of Community Innovation at Pinnacle Prevention in Chandler, Arizona. And our fourth witness today is Ms. Spencer Moss, who is the Executive Director of the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition in Charleston, West Virginia. And our fifth and final witness today is Mr. William Smitkamp, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Wawana Frozen Food in Clovis, California, who is testifying on behalf of the American Frozen Food Institute. I want to welcome all of you to our hearing today. And now we will proceed with your testimony. Mr. Wade, please begin when you are ready.
Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Thompson, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for your invitation to testify today. My name is Kyle Wade. I'm the CEO of the Atlanta Community Food Bank. We are a member of Feeding America, the national network of 200 member food banks that serve every county in the United States, distributing 7.5 billion pounds of food annually through a grassroots network of community-based feeding programs. Last year, my food bank in North Georgia provided 100 million pounds of food to 700,000 neighbors across 29 counties. Together, Feeding America food banks are uniquely capable of distributing emergency food safely, efficiently, equitably, and reliably to food insecure families when and where they need it. As we discuss the next Farm Bill, I want to deliver a simple message. Demand for food assistance is growing, and food banks need more federal support to meet rising demand. We all know how the pandemic dramatically increased food insecurity across the country. We met this crisis with an unprecedented federal response combined with an extraordinary expansion of food banks and other nonprofit feeding programs. Over time, more and more food insecure families got back on their feet and demand for food assistance declined. In recent months, however, rising prices for food, gas, and other basic needs, combined with the unwinding of many COVID recovery supports, have increased pressure on families. Lines at food banks are growing again, and at my food bank, our distribution volume over the last few months has now risen again to 35% higher than where we were before COVID. Meeting this demand is getting harder. Like every business in the country, our operating costs are skyrocketing due to rising wages, gas prices, and costs for maintaining and replacing equipment. Our costs for food acquisition have increased by 40% as we purchase more food at inflated prices to offset large declines in food commodities provided through federal nutrition programs. The Emergency Food Assistance Program, Tfab, has provided critical support for food banks, especially during the pandemic. We would not have met the need for food assistance during the pandemic were it not for the massive investments in additional Tfab spending authorized by Congress. This is particularly true in less populated areas of the country, where federal commodities account for a much larger percentage of the food distributed by food banks. But looking ahead, we are concerned that reverting back to pre-pandemic levels of Tfab spending in the next Farm Bill will leave us ill-prepared to meet the needs in our local communities. Food banks are anticipating a decline in federal commodities next year of 40% or more. In addition, many Tfab shipments right now are being canceled due to supply chain challenges and price increases. To offset these reductions, food banks are purchasing more food. In Atlanta, we will spend more than $15 million next year just to purchase food, which will account for more food than we expect to receive in Tfab commodities. That is not a sustainable pattern for the vast majority of food banks. We need your help to continue to meet the need for food assistance over the long term, and specifically, we need more Tfab. I encourage you to consider increasing the level of mandatory funding for Tfab to $450 million annually while increasing funding for Tfab storage and distribution costs. Alongside an increased investment in Tfab, I also encourage you to consider expanding access to the Commodity Supplemental Food Program and to support enhancements to the SNAP program. I refer you to my written testimony for more detail on enhancements to Csfp and SNAP. As you consider increasing funding for these programs, I also encourage you to consider what it takes to ensure this food is distributed safely and equitably in the communities that need it the most. Food insecurity continues to disproportionately impact communities of color and rural communities, both of which experience food insecurity rates that are twice as high as the national average. Getting food to these communities is often more challenging and more expensive. Here again, the nation's food banks are uniquely capable of ensuring federally funded food resources reach the people and communities that need it the most. We have developed the infrastructure and systems to store and move food safely and accountably, and more importantly, we have built relationships and trust in our country's most vulnerable communities. In Atlanta, 2/3 of the partners who work with us to distribute food are faith-based organizations representing a wide variety of faiths and denominations across urban, suburban, and rural communities. 60% of our partners serve majority-minority communities, and half are led by BIPOC leaders. This is why our community turns to us in a crisis, and it is why Congress and USDA can trust us to ensure the food you provide us is reaching the people who need it the most. I want to thank Chairman Scott for inviting me to testify. I look forward to working with the committee to advance our next farm bill, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wade. And now, Mr. Besaw, please begin when you're ready. Mr. Besaw, you may want to come a little closer to your mic. We're not hearing you clearly.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's a little muffled. Just get as close as you can, and we'll make do. Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, so Nathan White Makana went in Katan for allowing me to be here today to speak regarding the food distribution program on Indian reservations. Part of the comments I've heard here today about the increased funding and costs are important to Menominee and important to the tribes. And part of that response can be that much of what is in the Farm Bill or would be in the Farm Bill can be redirected to allow tribes to have that ability to take that same funding that may be going to them, or that may be through the Farm Bill and administered by AMS, to now have tribes have that authority to have control through self-governance processes. There are several things within the Farm Bill that tribes have been working through a tribal leaders consultation work group, and these are some of the concerns. One I will speak to is the 638 self-determination contracting. Another is working and having more assistance from the Agriculture Marketing Service in working to develop that point of contact and really work to allow tribes to walk through the process to become an eligible producer in the system. We have concerns on Indigenous representation in the FNS positions. Where that is available, tribes ask that we have positions filled by tribal members or by others who have received the training and education that they would need to be able to support tribes. I will talk about one of the programs that we are in, using the FDIPR's self-determination demonstration project. Menominee has been able to use self-determination to replace and supplant some of the 100 products that are available as commodities or products for our food distribution clients. What this does is allows tribes that want to participate in the 638 contracting process to now be able to come into contract with indigenous producers to use that same funding that AMS may have used to purchase product from wherever across the country and bring that to our food distribution, to our stores, our warehouses on reservation. We want to be able to shorten that food chain to build a more resilient food system. We want to look at providing jobs for our economy, for our tribal economies. So the 638 contracting allows tribes. This was put into the Farm Bill, the 2018, as a pilot project. It allows us to be that purchaser for certain foods grown indigenously, grown by tribes, to be able to purchase that food and to supplant or replace those certain foods. And we've done that by replacing and purchasing through that 638 process wild rice. We've replaced ground beef, ground bison, and beef roasts. We've also replaced apples with apples we've bought from indigenous producers, and smoked fish, lake trout fillets, whitefish fillets, and walleye from indigenous producers. So we're trying to grow our economies, and this is a good way, as we've heard before, where we're not necessarily trying to ask for money, too much additional money, but we would be replacing that authority where we do the actual ask. And we actually purchase. We know what's best for our tribal members.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. DeVito. And now, Dr. Gruner, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, members of the committee. I'm honored to have the opportunity to provide testimony today. My name is Jessie Gruner. I am the Director of Community Innovations at Pinnacle Prevention, an Arizona-based nonprofit. We've been administering USDA nutrition programs statewide in Arizona for over 5 years. Today, I want to share with you our experiences and recommendations around GusNIP, the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, and the Community Food Project's Competitive Grants Program. I would like to start off with GusNIP first, or the SNAP Incentive Program. In Arizona, we offer our Double Food Bucks program at multiple outlets, including farmers markets, CSAs, mobile markets, corner stores, as well as grocery stores. We started this program with Tfab Funding in 2016 with only 6 farmers market sites. 6 years later, we are now on our 3rd round of GusNIP funding from USDA, and we've grown our Double Up program to over 75 locations. From our experience, we want to share the value and importance of being able to have an adaptable program model that we can tailor based on the needs of our diverse communities, including urban, rural, and indigenous. The ability to tailor the incentive program has allowed us to spread across the state, particularly in areas that don't have access to a farmer's market. In our model, we prioritize locally grown produce. This prioritization has had a tremendous economic impact with small producers and has increased local spending on these products by more than 10-fold at our Double Up sites. Not only are families taking home more healthy, seasonal, local food, this program has become a consistent, reliable source of revenue for local farmers. We did not get to where we are today alone. Thanks to collaborations with other states and strong technical assistance, we were able to find new and innovative solutions and had an abundance of resources available for us to use. The 2018 Farm Bill created a National Nutrition Incentive Program, Training, Technical Assistance, Evaluation, and Information Center, known as the Nutrition Incentive Hub. Today, we would like to voice our support for ensuring current Farm Bill efforts continue to include technical support and assistance, which is critical for implementing and evaluating nutrition incentive programs. The program is currently designed with a dollar-for-dollar match requirement. While in Arizona, we were successful in securing state match funding, the current match structure inhibits our ability to expand our program, particularly in the grocery sector, which has a much higher SNAP volume and utilization rate. An alternative match structure would allow us to truly meet the needs of our communities. Next, I would like to talk about the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, which provides low-income seniors with coupons that can be exchanged for locally grown produce at farmers markets, roadside stands, and CSA programs. This is a tiny but mighty program. It's so much more than just food and can be part of the solution for reducing senior isolation. In some of our senior housing centers, our program was the only source of fresh food during the pandemic. In one of our rural mountain communities, a low-income housing site had a bus that would typically bring the seniors to the farmers market to spend their coupons. And during the pandemic, in order to protect their safety, they weren't able to bring seniors to the market. And this was really challenging for our seniors. Luckily, the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program allows up to 50% of the funds to be used on bulk food purchases. This flexibility allowed us to have local produce delivered to their housing centers. We also had kids send in pictures that they drew to be included in their produce bags. And it was really a beautiful way to bring connection to seniors during a really isolating time. We know that isolation was exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, but isolation both preceded the pandemic and will continue to be a challenge seniors face. Because this program is something that seniors look forward to, a one-time benefit is not enough to meet the need and maximize the program's potential benefits. Increasing the maximal amount seniors receive annually would allow more flexibility in the program structure and provide seniors more touch points with their communities. We also desperately need an investment in the administrative allocation for this program. Administrative costs are capped at 10%, which means the amount of dollars that can be used for personnel time is really limited, making it hard to reach the communities that need it, the support and assistance the most, especially in our rural areas. Finally, I would like to briefly mention the Community Food Projects Competitive Grants Program. While we see this program as the low-hanging fruit that helps to build capacity for our community organization and helps producers to be able to scale up for larger programs and projects. It helps organizations test innovation in a small regional level. If we want to be able to meet the challenges that are facing the future of our local, regional, and national food systems, we have to provide space and resources for idea incubation and continue to center small community food projects and socially disadvantaged producers. In many cases, this program is farmers' first introduction to USDA programs. As one of the lowest entry points, we see an opportunity to make this program.
Thank you, Ms. Moss. If you could wrap up for a minute there. Your time has expired, but thank you. Ms. Moss, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Spencer Moss, and I'm the Executive Director of the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition. We're a nonprofit organization, and since we work at the intersection of farm viability and food access, we take advantage of federal grant programs that allow us to pull resources into our rural communities. Today, I'll briefly discuss two programs that we've utilized, even though I could also speak to Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, community food projects, farmers market, local food promotional programs as well. I'm speaking to two programs that are nutrition-based, but also have fantastic economic development outcomes. And finally, I'll make three brief recommendations to make federal grant programs more accessible. So first, the Healthy Food Financing Initiative. The goal of this program is to improve food security in low-access communities through the establishment of new retail facilities, aggregation distribution hubs, and programming such as delivery programs. In 2019, we received one of these grants for $215,400. And with this grant, we helped establish 2 brick-and-mortar stores in downtown areas and 5 corner store kiosks in existing businesses in rural Pocahontas County, West Virginia. Now, this is a story of improved nutrition, but it is a story of economic development. On average, these brick and mortars have grossed $609,000 annually and employ 4.5 full-time and 5.5 part-time staff. And our work did not stop with the end of that grant. As a direct result of that grant, we established the West Virginia Rural Grocer Network, where we provide valuable access to technical assistance and training to nascent or rural grocers. Most are just people who are stepping up to feed their communities, and they're leaving careers in the trades or in education. We also provide access to capital to purchase things like refrigeration equipment. The second program I'm going to talk about briefly was that Gus Shoemaker Nutrition Incentive Program, or GUSNIP. We received FINI funds in 2018 to pilot a program that we would eventually call SNAP Stretch. And in 2020 and 2021, we received a GUSNIP award and a COVID response supplemental award. So SNAP Stretch doubles and triples SNAP EBT dollars, AKA formerly food stamps, at farmers markets, on-farm stands, mobile markets, CSAs, and a growing number of local retailers. Can you tell I've said that a few times? So if a SNAP user comes to the market and they say, I want to spend $10 in my SNAP, they're going to get $10 in market script to spend on any SNAP eligible item. They're also going to get $10 in SNAP Stretch script to spend on fruits and vegetables. If they're a senior or if they have their child with them, they're going to get an extra $10. This is another program that certainly improves nutrition as it stretches the food budgets of low-income SNAP recipients, but it's also a major economic benefit to our communities, capturing both federal food assistance dollars, federal grant funds, and philanthropic funds. This program has grown each year since 2018, and in 2021, with the help of the folks behind me, we helped 35,000 West Virginians access this program, putting $1 million into the hands of our farmers and local businesses. Now, with my remaining time, I want to briefly talk on some recommendations. Matching requirements. In theory, grant matching requirements show that there's some community investment in the program. In reality, matching requirements disadvantages rural communities, low-income communities, communities of color, and small nonprofit organizations. 91 out of 100 of the most disadvantaged communities in this country are rural, and only 5 to 7% of philanthropic funds come into rural communities. So thereby, there is less money available for rural communities to access, which is needed to access these federal funds. Number 2, requiring grants to be reimbursable. The practice of reimbursable grants disadvantages smaller organizations and smaller communities that do not have the cash flow to run a grant, spend the money first, wait 4 weeks to 4 months to receive a reimbursement. It can oftentimes completely lock out communities from accessing these federal funds. And lastly, programs need more funding. Many of these federal programs have not received caps in what community groups can apply for in many years. So what I could do with $500,000 in 2016 when I received my first Farmers Market Promotional Program grant versus what I can do today are very different, given the conversation we've already had about inflation. And yet, as grantees, we are increasingly expected to be more innovative, dig deeper in communities, have more partners, have more stakeholders, and affect more community change. But those dollars don't go as far, even though we're very happy to meet all of those expectations. And with that, I'm open for questions as well.
Thank you, Ms. Moss. And now Mr. Smitkamp.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Thompson, and distinguished members of this committee. I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about USDA feeding programs and how they can best serve the consumers, especially the most vulnerable and underserved populations. I'm Bill Smitkamp, President and CEO of Valley in Clovis, California. I'm representing the American Frozen Food Institute. At Ramona, we process over 125 million pounds of fresh frozen fruits, nutritious frozen fruits and products that we supply worldwide to sectors such as the school lunch program, the food service entities, retail, and we are also an ingredient supplier. We've been in business since 1963, and we are honored to have been partners with the USDA for over 35 years, serving families who participated in the National School Lunch Program as well as Tfab. I am personally, oh man, let's see. I am passionate about feeding communities, not just in my hometown, but among populations around the community. Family, businesses, and community are a way of life for me and my family, and I think this is very important that we're here today. We believe households are best served when they have access to all forms of nutritious foods, just as my family does. We know the USDA nutrition programs have been successful in bringing fresh foods into recipients. However, there's an opportunity to include and promote frozen foods to enhance these programs and help ensure families have access to high-quality, nutritious nutrition throughout the year, regardless of their geographic location. This is especially true in programs such as GusNIP, in both the Produce Prescription Program, FDIPR, and the consumer education through programs such as SNAP-Ed. When we think about strengthening these programs in 2023 Farm Bill, there are three main components I'd encourage you to consider. Americans fall far short of meeting recommended intakes of produce, and therefore feeding programs intended to increase produce consumption should promote all forms of produce. The U.S. Dietary Guidelines for Americans recommend consumers eat all forms of fruits and vegetables, including frozen, fresh, canned, and dried, to meet the recommended daily intakes. Frozen foods offer a cost-effective and pragmatic way for people to meet these intakes. Secondly, the frozen food advantage. The frozen food promotes a sustainable food system, especially one that minimizes food waste. Frozen foods are critical to fighting food waste due to the extended shelf life and proportional serving that help consumers prepare just the right amount of food that they need to eat. For example, families currently throw away over $2,200 a year in food waste, but frozen foods are pre-measured, ready to serve, their longer shelf life, and refrigerated over fresh foods. So households can avoid their financial waste by utilizing frozen products. And then third, the supply chain stability. We should consider that freezing is like nature's pause. It allows us all to enjoy just baked, just harvested, just crafted food at our convenience without losing any of the freshness or its nutritional benefit. For example, Mother's Day. We just celebrated all of our mothers, and the strawberry season was ramping up. And then that Sunday, we celebrated with strawberry shortcakes. But then what happened on Monday? There was no market after that. That is where the frozen food industry steps in as a safety net and takes those strawberries on, freezes them, puts them in 4-ounce fruit cups for the USDA school lunch program or for the Tfab program. And this is where I believe that we need to improve the ability to get frozen into these programs. Unfortunately, we often hear, due to lack of funding, there's lack of freezers capacities for schools, food banks, pantries, retail locations, that these outlets cannot or will not accept frozen product. The real point here is I'm trying to make is that our peach season is 4 months, all during when school is out. We can have frozen peaches all year round. You can have them in November, December, January when it's done. I thank you for your time.
And thank you so much, and thank all of you. You've all given wonderful, informative testimonies. And now we'll move to our questions at this time. Members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members. You will be recognized for 5 minutes each in order to allow us to get in as many questions as possible. And as always, please do keep your microphones muted until you're recognized so we can eliminate any background noise. And now let me start off. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Wade, you have delivered some very troublesome news to this committee. And it is news that is daily on all the newscasts. People are not just suffering from the lack of food, but the lack of ability to get the food with the high prices. What I want you to do, if you can, is share with us and the nation how serious this program is. We have veterans not being fed, not getting it. Tell us how serious this is, and you are in a position to best tell us members of Congress, what do we need to do right now to help with this food crisis, with your Feeding America, fellow community food banks? We are determined to make sure that nobody goes hungry in our nation. Everything almost you can do without, but food you can't. So it's critical. Tell us what we need to do here in Congress to help you and to address this food accessibility crisis.
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. And as I said in my testimony, lines at food banks are now increasing again. We went through a period over the latter half of last calendar year where we were really seeing a reduction in demand as people were getting back on their feet. But the impact of rising gas prices, food prices, and other basic needs is having a serious impact. I just had a conversation at the end of last week with a couple of our feeding program partners in a couple of counties, historically known as affluent suburban counties north of Atlanta, in Cobb County and in North Fulton County. And those partners are telling us how the client base that they serve is growing. And more troubling is that in that client base, there are people who are showing up who, just like in the early days of the pandemic, have never needed help getting food before in their lives.
Yeah.
These are new clients. They had found a way to survive the pandemic, and now they're facing trouble. What we need help with in the Feeding America network, and for my food bank in particular, is as we look forward in the Farm Bill, that we need increased mandatory funding for Tfab commodities. Tfab commodities are really high-quality, nutritious food products that offer a lot of variety. They offer high nutritional content, and they help us ensure that our client base has access to the food that they need.
So you have given us one, the Tfab funding. What is it now, and how much additional do you need, and how, so we can address it
we've
as we're
enjoyed
dealing with
tremendous
the fund?
Tfab access and other nutrition program access during the pandemic. And that provided us with a huge influx of food during that critical time. We're in the process right now of those supplemental forms of funding having been exhausted, of reverting back to the baseline of Tfab. What that means is that our access to Tfab in the next 18 months is going to decline significantly, 40% or more. We're asking for an increase to $450 million in annual Tfab funding as part of the next Farm Bill.
$450 million increase into the Farm Bill.
In
Is that-
total Tfab funding of $450
Okay,
million.
we want to work with you on that. Our staff will follow up on that because I agree with you. I wanted to get to you also, but in the spirit of what I say, my time has expired. Ranking member, maybe you will.
Chairman, you're a man of your word.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Hey, well, thanks once again to all the witnesses. You know, the recently announced White House Conference on Food, Nutrition, Hunger, and Health, which is really kind of interesting. I would, no outreach from the White House on this. You would think you would want to engage the authorizing committee when it comes to nutrition. But they advertise itself as an event to accelerate progress and drive significant changes to end hunger, improve nutrition, and physical activity, reduce diet-related disease, and close the disparities around them. Now, while that mission is laudable, as I've said before, the listening session to date have left a lot to be desired, including a strong focus on just SNAP-specific policy and not much else, including the programs that you all here are here to discuss. So, for any of the witnesses, what has been your participation thus far in that process? Has any of the organizations represented here had a role? I assume Feeding America.
So I know Feeding America, the national organization, is in conversation with the various organizers of the conference. And in particular, what our network is working to do is to help identify folks who are receiving food insecure families, people with lived experience, who can talk about the challenges they experience day to day, and have those folks participate in a variety of listening sessions to inform the content of the conference. And then I think there's other conversations going on among Feeding America folks that I haven't been privy to personally, but I know that we are engaged in the planning around the conference.
Okay. Any other organizations represented here today have received an invitation to be engaged in this conference? Not seeing in. Okay, let's say when Feeding America has been, and if you were invited, which I'm really surprised that by the fact that you weren't. So if you were to say, and you were king for a day, what would you like to? What would this conference look like if you were able to plan it, organize it, implement it? What kind of conversations? What would it look like?
Thank you, Ranking Member. We have been, my staff said, we have been invited, and I think what we would be looking for from the conference would be just equal access, fresh, frozen, canned, so that there was, again, parity in everything that we do. And that would be really what we're looking for. We don't want the big side of it, but our products are better transported than some of the fresh side of things.
Okay, very good. Any other thoughts? What you would like to see this conference turn out to be, please, Ms. Moss.
Certainly. I think it would be really interesting to see an emphasis on rural communities, and particularly the farmers that support feeding people in this country. I think there's a lot of emphasis placed on commodities and whatnot, but given the mobility issues of food that we've seen throughout the pandemic, I think an emphasis on our local agriculture and our local farmers would be significant, and really looking at rural communities. So that's what I would love to see an emphasis.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Wade, any thoughts of, you obviously, your organizations are going to be a part of the process. If you had the ability to help shape this agenda, the discussions, anything particular you really want to make sure this would look like?
Yeah, I'd just offer three thoughts. I think first, as I said, it's really important that we listen to food insecure families and understand what life looks like on the ground for them firsthand as the first sort of data point in understanding what solutions we need to develop to help them have food access. Let's listen to them first. I think second, we have to think about the hunger issue, the food insecurity issue, as more broadly as an economic insecurity issue, and think about what it takes comprehensively to help people have access to financial opportunity that would prevent food insecurity. And then I think thirdly, I would want to see us in that conversation with alignment on the goals and metrics of what success looks like. I think sometimes we don't have alignment on metrics and goals, and that leads to a lot of disagreement about inputs. If we can get aligned on goals and metrics, that would help us develop better solutions.
Very good. Well, Chairman, thank you so much. My time has expired.
The gentleman from California, Mr. Costa, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Livestock and Foreign Agriculture, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing. It's important as we set the table, literally and figuratively, for next year's Farm Bill. And I want to thank the witnesses. I think you've all underlined in various ways what I like to say, and that is that food that we grow in America is a national security issue. And when we talk about the SNAP program, otherwise referred to as food stamps, but the other programs that all of you touched upon in one fashion or another, what we're talking about is America's safety net to ensure that, in fact, that all Americans have quality and affordable food. But in some cases, we know we have real challenges. And certainly this pandemic, I think, pointed out the challenges we have, especially among those who live in food deserts, those who have other difficult challenges in terms of their economic income and being able to have a decent meal on their dinner table. So much of the children today, we know in nutrition programs, get their best meal of the day in the school lunch or breakfast program. And of course, when we don't have school going on, that's more difficult for those children. Obviously not time to cover all of the areas, but Mr. Bill Smitkamp of Wawona Foods in Clovis, California, I've worked with you and your family for now 3 generations, and I want to commend you for not only your efforts in a pioneer in terms of the frozen food production and the many fruits that you are able to provide over an entire year, as you noted in your testimony, but also the importance of the nutritional value of that program and the challenges faced in making that available. Obviously, freezer capacity and other factors and supply chain are critical, but you and I have discussed this in the past, Bill, as to what the USDA qualifies that should be included or not included in the school lunch programs in terms of what's nutritious. And we grow so many products out in California, but around the country. What are your thoughts in terms of how we do a better job?
Well, I think the USDA currently is doing an excellent job reaching out. We just had a meeting with them yesterday in regards to innovation, how we can get more products into them. But during the pandemic, for example, we were very instrumental with fruit cups and individual servings rather than the number 10 can, or a way where fresh fruit was not quite available during the winter months. There was innovative serving sizes that the frozen industry could apply to all these things. We just think that with what we're doing, that we continue to move forward with frozen in the language. I think this is part of what we
Is freezer capacity an issue, especially in our schools?
No. I think we have the capacity to supply more frozen foods to the world.
How about our food banks?
Pardon me?
How about our food banks?
And the food banks. I think again, we are the safety net, the frozen food side, whether it's freezers of fruits or vegetables.
When the height of the pandemic and having people that had never been, Mr. Wadley has indicated, to a food bank in their lives, put more pressure and demand on the services of food banks. I found some of the food banks in our area having challenges in terms of being able to make that supply. The point you made to the chair in your closing testimony talked about increasing funding, and I think one of the debates we're going to have here in committee next year is baseline funding. If we're going to be able to expand capacity here in a host of areas, we're going to have to deal with the baseline funding. Have the food banks in the country come up with any suggestions on how we tackle that issue?
In terms of expanding baseline funding?
Right.
Well, I mean, I don't know how to solve the budgetary.
No, I'm not expecting you to do that. Are you
But
recommendations in terms of anticipating what the need may be?
Yeah, so our recommendation is $450 million in baseline mandatory
Nationwide.
funding. Nationwide, yes.
All right. You talk about waste in our food supply chain, and you noted, I think, $2,100. How do we get at the waste that we need to cut at all ends of the food supply chain? My time's obviously almost over, but I'd like you to submit that to the committee for future reference.
Thank you. And now the chairman recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Austin Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. And I want to focus on the domestic food issue, but I do want to make just a brief statement that I hope that America is watching what's happening with the food supply around the world. Ukraine exported 50 million metric tons of corn and wheat. They were the largest supplier of the UN World Food Program. And while we have challenges in America, I'm afraid that we're about to see people literally starving to death throughout Africa, Asia, and other lower income parts of the world. And we need to be cognizant that the nitrogen and the potash that was coming through the Black Sea region, which is two of the key elements we use to achieve the yields inside the United States, that supply of fertilizer may not be there next year. And we need to be cognizant of that, and we need to be making sure that we're doing everything we can as a committee to replace the supply from Russia and Belarus and others so that we're not dependent on them for our yields. That said, Mr. Wade, I'm from Georgia, and before the family food box program was put in, I literally know farmers who were carrying under hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of vegetables. It was done admittedly hastily, but I will tell you, those crops would have been left to rot in the field, and I watched my National Guard pass out boxes of food that I think any of us would have been proud to serve on the most special of days in our homes. I'm disappointed in the criticism of that program from President Biden and Secretary Vilsack. I think it was a program that was extremely effective and served America well, especially based on the speed with which it was put in. We've moved now to the Tfab program since Farmers to Families was canceled. And just I understand that your food bank, that you've received some of these boxes already, is that correct?
Yes, we've received boxes through both programs. The Farmers to Families Food Box Program provided a lot of support for our community, helped us meet the need in our community, and in the new program, we've benefited from that as well.
And how many commodities are available through that program?
I don't know the specific number of commodities. We can follow up with that specific answer.
All right. Do you think it's meeting your demand for fresh produce?
Well, I would say that the demand for fresh produce in our community currently exceeds what we're doing. I think we are trying to grow our capacity to move produce effectively. Some of the challenges relate to what Mr. Smitkamp was talking about, an opportunity to invest in processing capacity to preserve more fresh product so that it can be utilized by the families that we serve. I think investments in agile programs that can operate quickly at scale to capture surplus produce will help us move more produce to the families who need it. So again, the Farmers to Families Food Box Program was an attempt to do that, and I think we benefited a lot from it.
Okay. Mr. Smitkamp, for the most part, each of the programs under discussion, they include all forms of produce as well as a variety of other frozen products. What specific programs need a stronger focus on all of these forms?
Well, I think when it really comes down to it, it's the access, but it's also the ability to distribute and warehouse in these rural communities that do not have the capacity to handle fresh and frozen products across the country. And that's where I believe the focus really needs to be, is on capacity of storage. When Congressman Costa asked me about availability. I was thinking about it from a production side rather than from the recipient side. But it really is needed on the recipient side because we have the capacity to produce it, but then there's no capacity to store it and move it.
Mm-hmm. I want to thank all of you for being here and helping us solve these challenges as we push ahead. And I just want to again advocate for those who are working to solve the problems throughout the world with the issues and the new challenges from Russia. Thank you.
The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, who is also the chair of the House Committee on Rules, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me start off by thanking all our witnesses for their comprehensive testimonies about these incredibly important programs that I'm determined to see strengthened in the next Farm Bill. I want to bring up a few points on GovSNP, which has continued to show us that incentives actually work. When I was on a farm tour last year throughout Massachusetts, I heard from farmers that the Double Up Bucks program has made an incredible difference in their lives and for the lives of their customers. They mentioned to me that during the pandemic, when many of us were worried about going to the grocery store, that the Double Up program helped support people looking to make healthier choices without limiting what consumers could and could not buy. What I care about is making it easier for people to access fruits and vegetables. And that's exactly what programs through GovSNP do. And, that to me is better than having, as some of my colleagues have advocated, having government dictate, what people can and cannot eat or what they can and cannot purchase with their SNAP dollars. I think that, quite frankly, I think that's offensive. It robs people of choice and it robs people of dignity. And so my goal is to find ways to expand these incentive programs in the next Farm Bill, and I look forward to working with my colleagues who also get these that these incentives actually help people make healthier choices that make sense for them, and also enables them to buy culturally appropriate foods for their families. So next, while we have Mr. Besaw here, I want to take a minute to talk about the food distribution program on Indian reservations, especially how we can expand regional purchasing. Through the Rules Committee's push for a White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health, I've had the opportunity to speak with tribal leaders all across this country. And while I'm amazed by the work that this program has done, I heard over and over that tribes are looking for more diversity in food options available to them. And they're looking for more, and the tribal leaders would tell me that what tribes eat in the Pacific Northwest is not the same of what tribes in the Southeast want in their eating. And yet there's not currently a structure in place to fully support this. So this is something I started working on in the last Farm Bill, and it's something that I fully intend to continue working with USDA on. So Mr. Besaw, I'd like to ask, in your opinion, what do we need to make regional purchasing a reality? What are the things that you in your role think that we would need to make regional purchasing feasible?
One of the things, and thank you for that, one of the things that we looked at, again, is using the 638 funding, the Indian Self-Determination Act. So if we took that, if we were allowed, and we're not talking additional funding, we're talking about funding AMS currently uses to purchase, and now we have that ability to contract so we can make the determinations on purchasing. We can help grow the local producers and ranchers. Many times on tribal reservations, we do not have that in place right now. Enough of that, enough of the farm, the bigger industry on there. If we had that ability to be able to decide who we purchase from using an expanded and permanent 638 funding, which really is not so much additional funding, but is replacing what AMS currently does by us deciding who those local producers are, we can grow them. If they have the capital to build their infrastructure, put in more pack wash, more fencing, and really grow what they do, then there's a greater chance that they can expand. And that's what we want. We don't want to be fed a fish. We want to be able to learn how to fish. So we want to build those economies. And that's a strong answer towards some of the other inputs and some of the other international and national food systems problems we have.
Right.
We want to have a resilient, smaller system in place.
No, and I appreciate, I heard that over and over from other leaders. Let me just say one thing. That's why we need a White House conference on nutrition, health, and hunger. We need to connect the dots better. And I think we need to listen to people on the ground and people with lived experiences. And again, I would hope that everybody on this committee, Democrats and Republicans alike, rather than try to diminish the importance of a White House conference, would embrace it and use this opportunity for us to look at these issues holistically and actually help people get access to the food that they want. But thank you very much.
Thank you. And now the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Crawford, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to direct this question to Dr. Gruner. Recent evaluations of GusNIP have reported about 85% of retailers are in urban areas, despite there being roughly the same SNAP density across different geographies and demographics. Additionally, about 70% of projects are in farmers markets. While supporting smaller local farmers is vitally important, less than 1% of SNAP benefits are redeemed at farmers markets. What more can be done to ensure retail SNAP customers have access to incentive programs like GusNIP in rural areas and in the retailers where they most often redeem benefits? And go ahead and give me your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Representative Crawford. I think, as I mentioned, a stronger investment in GusNIP, in particular for grocery expansion, is desperately needed. We know that farmers markets are limited, usually once a week, sometimes twice a week for a couple of hours. Grocery stores are open every single day, all hours, except for evenings usually. So they have a much higher SNAP volume and also utilization rate. So just in our experience, when we've tried to expand into some of our grocery outlets and corner stores in smaller rural areas, we've gone through funding a lot more quickly. Our funding formula was kind of blown out of the water. We tried our best to use some of the resources available to estimate what the funds would be so we could properly supply and bring on those partners. And then what we don't want to do is go into communities for only a limited time and then we run out of funding and have to pull out, because that's harmful for growers. It's harmful for retailers that participate, and it's especially harmful for community members that start to use that resource. So really having additional investment, I think, is really important if we want to think about how to expand into grocery and corner stores, and thinking about the utilization rate that is much higher than farmers markets. And so we just have to have that additional investment in order to do that. Secondly, I'd say that we also need help and more investment in the POS technology, sometimes getting the incentive built into POS systems, which are vastly different across retailers, especially in rural areas. They need additional technical support and resources for getting that POS to kind of talk to that incentive model. So I'd say those are the kind of two investments I would recommend, is a higher incentive and also our investment in POS technology that can help to distribute the incentive.
Mr. Moss, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly. And I would echo what Dr. Gruner said. We've encountered a similar.
Sorry.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Moss.
Oh, okay. I would echo what she said. We have experienced, so last year, looking at our numbers, we were in 21 farmers markets and 10 brick and mortar stores. And so when we looked at our allocations this year, we have less money because we have less philanthropic investment this year. And so some of our grocery stores sort of pulled out because it just wasn't enough money to incentivize the additional work on their part, even though ideologically they agree with the program and they want to be a part of that. So I certainly, could almost see an additional program that was aimed at GusNIP in grocery stores instead of having grocery stores, corner markets, brick and mortar, mobiles, farmers markets, things along those lines. that would be my initial thought on it.
Ms. Moss, we know about 9 out of 10 Americans aren't meeting dietary guidelines for Americans' fruit and vegetable consumption recommendations. We also know most fruits and vegetables purchased by USDA for distribution and nutrition programs aren't fresh. We see in programs like WIC where clients can select the produce of their choice. For example, consumers typically choose to spend most of their benefit on the fresh option. Appreciating that all forms of fruit and vegetables can help meet dietary guideline recommendations, are you able to speak to why ensuring the families you serve have access to fresh fruits and vegetables through federal nutrition programs is equally important?
I'm sorry, and just double checking, why is it equally important that families have access to fresh fruits and vegetables?
Right.
Yeah, certainly. For us, one of the things we look at is again, I represent a lot of local agriculture. So when things are picked at the peak of freshness, it's a higher degree of nutrition. And I think there's also an amazing sort of connection to, your local farmer or your local community. We don't move as much product around. Product doesn't get trucked nearly as far. So that can also help reduce the prices. So what we see in our local communities is our farmers drive, not as far of a distance, and can sort of lower the prices of these fresh fruits and vegetable items.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And now the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, who is also the vice chair of the Committee on Agriculture, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Thompson, for hosting today's hearing. To our witnesses, your expert testimony clearly paints the stark reality that what we're facing as a nation. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, food insecurity was at its lowest since the 2008 recession. And although COVID-19 is receding, the demand for food aid has not receded. We can point to a perfect storm of factors, whether worker shortages or global supply chains caused by the war in Ukraine. Families and households are struggling today, and Congress must rise to meet these demands. Last week, along with Representative McGovern and Lee, I sent a letter to the House and Senate leadership urging immediate action to prevent the hunger cliff that looms ahead when the federal COVID-19 public health emergency expires. The non-SNAP nutrition programs we're discussing today are currently weathering this storm through the COVID-19 recovery bill passed in 2020. And I'm worried about the capacity that these programs currently have. Mr. Wade, your testimony states that over 5 million seniors face hunger in the U.S. One effective program discussed, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, works to mitigate food insecurity for this population. So what are some of your recommendations for Congress to further investigate Csfp in the upcoming Farm Bill?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. The Csfp program is a really important resource for low-income seniors who face food insecurity. Many food banks around the country help operate the Csfp program, delivering really high-quality food boxes to these seniors to round out their need for nutrition. And in the next Farm Bill, we recommend a number of different enhancements to the Csfp program. Number one, we think expanding access to the program would be very beneficial by increasing the eligibility determination above the current level of 130% of the federal poverty line. We also recommend increasing the length of time between recertification periods to ensure that more seniors are able to participate. We recommend instituting a self-declaration of needs for determining Csfp eligibility, and we recommend tailoring Csfp food packaging to assist with meeting dietary and medical needs of seniors.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you. It's quite a list. Great. So, Ms. Moss, you spoke of the successes seen with the implementation of GusNIP and the Healthy Food Financing Initiative in rural communities across your state. Your testimony speaks to how hunger issues are cross-cutting across all demographics. So Although you're an expert concerning rural food security, can you speak to the overall need for increased funding for all communities that utilize these programs?
Yeah, certainly. These programs are competitive grant programs, which means that as an organization or as a community, you have to apply. You have to write an amazing grant with amazing evaluation metrics. You have to have all the right partners. You have to have all the right match funding. And then if your grant reviewer is really feeling you that day, you might get lucky and get put into a pot that might get funding. Inherently it's a very competitive process. And so if there were either additional funding or the process was not competitive, I think we could see these programs really affect more communities.
Okay. So can you share just a little bit more about what your participants are saying about their ability to buy and eat more produce?
Oh my goodness. Okay. I will share with you a story. I had a mom call me just Friday. She called me and she said, "Hey, do you know of any voucher programs for families with a type 1 diabetic child?" I said, "No, it's not really what we do," although I could pointed her in the direction of a few resources. And I said, "Let me tell you about Snap Stretch." So this mother tells me the story of the fact that they were a middle income family. Dad got COVID, was in the hospital on a ventilator for 4 months. Now he has long COVID. He's not even the same person. His accent has changed. He is now disabled. Mom was working at a nursing home, lost her job. The child is 14 years old, and she's a type 1 diabetic, and they cannot keep her blood sugar under control, so she's consistently in the hospital. And mom says, "I don't know what I'm doing. I need to change her diet. I get $134 a month in food stamps. What do I do?" So I was able to talk to her about really stretching her SNAP budget.
Well, thank you so much. I'm out of time, I think. Is that correct? I think I'm out of time. But
Yes. Thank you very much,
Thank you so much for the responses. I appreciate it.
Ms. Adams. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Moss. And now the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMaffa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To our witnesses here, thank you for being here and participating. As we contemplate the next Farm Bill and reflecting upon the elements that were in the 2018 Farm Bill, what would you look at would be some improvements on modifying the feeding programs, et cetera? Coordination, is there something that could be done on improving coordination between the agencies and such? What should we be looking at really that would get a more streamlined, better approach towards more success?
From our perspective in the network of food banks, the Farm Bill has provided tremendous support to our work over the last 4 years. We think that, again, expanding mandatory Tfab funding levels will be a critical part of ensuring that we meet the needs in our local communities. We think there are opportunities to continue to invest in capacity. We heard from Mr. Smitkamp about the availability of frozen product, and continuing to invest in capacity at the local level for freezer and cooler capacity can help us move more high-quality produce, both fresh and frozen, in communities that need it the most. We certainly think that there are always opportunities to, in terms of working with producers, to have better coordination in the way that purchasing is planned out. Smaller producers in particular need to know well in advance what kind of opportunities exist so that they can get crops in the ground in time to participate in some of these contract opportunities with Tfab.
Let's go back to the refrigeration and freezing aspect of frozen foods, et cetera. Is that going to be a huge challenge on just the ongoing costs of electricity's no bargain these days, and as well as the space required to keep such at food banks or the others on the panel with your way of handling business. Is that a big, something that's really being clamored for, or is it a duplicative effort?
Well, food banks around the country are investing in or trying to invest in capacity, freezer cooler capacity. My food bank completed a capital campaign and moved into a new building that's 345,000 square feet large with 75,000 square feet of freezer cooler space in March of 2020. The other 7 food banks that are serving the state of Georgia are all engaged right now in capital projects to expand freezer cooler capacity and other kind of warehousing capacity.
Well, let me narrow it down then. Is that seen as a top priority or number 1 priority, or what is really the most important thing we can be looking at as we contemplate Farm Bill for those needs? Well, overall needs.
Yeah, outside of protecting and preserving the SNAP program, the number 1 priority for us in food banks is mandatory Tfab funding and expanding that. We need food. I think certainly being able to invest, particularly for smaller food banks, being able to invest in freezer cooler capacity, having funding sources at the federal level can help with that. But Tfab funding is at the top of the list.
Okay. The others, what would you what should we prioritize? Can't say it.
I'm sorry?
What should we prioritize coming in the next Farm Bill?
Well, it certainly would be in the produce prescription side, and the GusNIP would be put in all forms. So that way, because it's right now dedicated to fresh. And by having all forms, we can complement what's going on. So when the food producer, if we're going to go to the regional side, doesn't quite have enough crop or has an overcrop, so we can balance it with the frozen food or canned or all forms. So I think that is the key, that we're here at the table just asking for the appropriate thing for the recipient to get the healthy, nutritious food.
And being domestic production, would that be a priority rather than import?
I'm sorry?
Domestic production instead of imported, would that be a priority too?
Domestic.
Yes, okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
I'm
I'll yield
sorry.
back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. LaValva. And now the gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. Spanberger, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. And before I turn to questions, I would like to call attention to an impending deadline that is of critical importance to the well-being of our children across the country, and certainly the planning for our school districts across the country. On June 30th, less than 3 weeks from today, the child nutrition waivers that provide schools with flexibilities to feed children will expire. And I have heard from communities, counties across central Virginia imploring us to extend these waivers because they are valuable to schools' ability to plan for and provide those in-school programs. These waivers have been a lifeline for schools, for students, for parents, especially amid ongoing pandemic-related supply chain challenges. And a survey from the School Nutrition Association found that 97% of respondents were impacted by higher food and packaging prices. With the current waivers, most schools receive $4.56 in reimbursement for each school lunch received, and without them, most only receive $3.75. To prepare for these waivers expiring, school districts are raising prices for students for the first time in years to make up for the increase in costs. And for hardworking parents across the country, every cent counts. We can address these rising costs, including by passing my Lower Food and Fuel Costs Act on the House floor this week, but as we do so, we must ensure that children have access to healthy, nutritious food. Failure to act and extend these waivers will mean more hungry kids, higher costs for parents, and a lot of confusion and lack of planning for school districts across the country. As we get closer to the June 30th expiration date, I urge my colleagues in the House and the Senate to heed the pleas from our local school districts, take up the bipartisan legislation, Keeping School Meals Flexible Act, to extend these waivers. And another program, switching gears to this hearing, that I hear consistently about from food banks and pantries across our district is the Tfab program. Now more than ever, food banks rely on this program, and the Federation of Virginia Food Banks, comprised of 7 food banks across the Commonwealth, purchased 30% more food in 2021 compared to 2019 to keep pace with the growing need. So, Mr. Wade, thank you so much for your testimony. And you mentioned that approximately a third of the food commodities your food bank distributed last year were provided through Tfab. Could you talk a little bit about some of the logistical barriers or challenges that you might face with the administration of Tfab? And as we're looking to strengthen the program, speak to some of those challenges.
Well, in terms of logistical challenges around Tfab, I think the biggest challenge we're facing right now is that a number of Tfab orders, for us, 13% for the nation, wide number is closer to 16 or 17% of these Tfab shipments are being canceled. And obviously that creates lots of challenges. Number one, we don't have the food coming. But number two, we've also been planning around those shipments coming and basing other kind of purchasing or sourcing decisions on the expectation that food would be arriving. And so, the reason why those orders are being canceled are complex. They relate to the complexity in the broader supply chain. But that's obviously a challenge that we're facing right now. More importantly, Tfab is a great program. We support it 100%. We want to see additional funding because, that food is a lifeline in particular for smaller food banks serving smaller communities.
Speaking of which, and I do appreciate that you had included in your comments the recommendation related to increasing funding for Tfab storage and distribution. Pivoting to some of the smaller communities, certainly I hear from Virginia food banks about how rural distribution allows them to reach more households. Mobile distribution allows them to reach more households, particularly in rural communities. Could you comment on the impact that this flexibility for mobile distribution has had on the communities that you serve?
Sure. So we've, we have a tremendous network of community-based partners who get food from us and distribute in their local community. We've invested in a lot of their capacity, but in times of great crisis or in more rural communities where the distance between pantries is larger, being able to operate mobile distribution sites allows us to get the food closer to where people are at a time when they need it. And so it's had a huge impact for us in a variety of communities, particularly in rural communities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you.
And now the gentleman from South Dakota, Mr. Johnson, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the days of COVID, to the Farmers to Families Food Box Program. And given all of the constraints and the Herculean efforts that needed to be accomplished, I always felt like that program answered the bell in a most impressive way, not perfectly, but quite impressive. I just want to ask the panelists for their reactions to that. And part of the reason I ask is it seemed like some of the reputation for that program has been more modest than what I think the impressive delivery and execution was. And so how did the program work? What can we learn from that? And what are the potential uses of that kind of delivery mechanism in the future?
If I could speak to that, so Food and Farm Coalition works with with the 2 food banks in the state of West Virginia, and what we saw from that program, especially initially, is that food was not, first of all, was not coming from any farmers in West Virginia, and secondly, they weren't bringing food that we would consider to be culturally appropriate in West Virginia, and it was not coming in a timely manner. So. That program didn't really do well for us in our very rural state and our very rural communities.
So, Ms. Moss, just to follow up, because I think that's a little different than what I heard from South Dakota, but obviously when you roll out a national program, you're going to have some high points and some low areas. And I did hear some of those complaints in South Dakota. They diminished pretty rapidly as the program got a little more mature. Did you see any improvement in West Virginia?
I think in the second round, when new contracts came out, our food banks did have somewhat better contracts for food groups coming from Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. that were delivering those products. But our 2 food bank directors were very glad to see that program end.
Yeah, I mean, that's good feedback. Well, what about anybody else? Other experiences?
We can echo that as well. In Arizona, that was our experience. The second round, we did have, I think, 1 local dairy producer that was able to participate, but we weren't able to have a lot of our local food producers. So I think we are really welcoming the opportunity for the local food purchasing cooperative agreement program, as we're calling LFPA, as another opportunity to kind of take the good things that came from CFAP and invite our local producers to be part of that solution. So I'm really looking forward to the opportunities that are going to come this year, building on that program and just creating more opportunities for local product to go to families that need it the most.
And if I may pitch in, one of the things we found in Wisconsin, and I'm going to speak to Wisconsin, to what we found is that sadly, we lead in a lot of the health indicators in a bad way with diabetes, hypertension, lactose intolerance, heart disease, reduced life expectancy. And a lot of the foods that were in the boxes were incompatible with many of our elders and some other individuals on the reservations. And it's not that we were not appreciative. I mean, we got food. So what we had done was said, this needs to push us to really look at trying to look at a sovereign food system, to really look at how can we get the foods that we know are culturally appropriate, that our elders can use almost in that food as medicine type approach. And that's where we went with that. And we've received all types of accolades from individuals. For instance, even we buy from the Oneida Nation in Wisconsin. We replace, there's over 100 food items on the food distribution category. And with the 638, you can replace or supplant existing those foods with comparable.
So, sir, I have one more follow-up for you in just 30 seconds. I mean, you talk about them not being a good fit for your elders. Of course, we have 9 reservations in South Dakota. Diabetes is a big concern there. The food boxes in South Dakota weren't overly high on sugar, near as I could tell. Maybe your experience in Wisconsin was different?
Yeah, I think just systemically with all of the foods, the processed foods within that, I think that caused the concern more than anything.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I know I'm out of time, and so, or Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. And
Mr.
now the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. Hayes, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Nutrition Oversight and Department Operations, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having this very important hearing. I'm trying to figure out now how I'm going to get through all of my questions, and also Ms. Spencer Moss, I'm very interested in hearing the end of the story you were telling about how you responded to this parent with her questions about expanding the diet of her diabetic child.
Yeah, so fortunately I got close to the end of the story, but essentially it was, okay, your farm is quote unquote up a holler in a county where we don't actually have a SNAP Stretch program, but let me point you to 2 SNAP Stretch sites in one county over and one more in another county over that is open, 7 days a week. A very ecstatic mama to have the opportunity to triple her SNAP, her $134 in SNAP, to try to get her daughter's diet under control.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I think it ties in very nicely with the questions that my colleague, Mr. Johnson, was just asking. People with very specific and unique dietary needs, we really have to have programs that are malleable and flexible so that we are not just providing food that is unusable to people who have very hyper-specific dietary restrictions. So that's very helpful. I'm happy that that mother was able to connect with you. We've heard from the hearing today that matching requirements often disadvantage rural communities, and I'm talking about the GusNIP program, low-resource communities, communities of color, and smaller nonprofit organizations because they have less access to food. My question is for Ms. Grunner. How can a shift in matching requirements help these communities gain access to more fruits and vegetables? And what else can we do to ensure that these hard-to-reach or especially vulnerable communities are better served by these programs? And I'll just add that one of the things that the experience in my state of Connecticut with many of the Farmers to Families Food Box, we had one Connecticut farm that was involved in the program. Much of what was brought in was shipped, packaged somewhere else. By the time it got to us, it was expired, outdated, bruised. So how do we really utilize local farmers in these programs?
Thanks, Representative Hayes. I think from first speaking to the match requirement, the one-to-one match requirement means that we've got to find capital in our communities, which we work really hard to do. But I will say in some of our more urban communities, it is easier to find partners that are willing to give that match requirement. Sometimes that comes with a stipulation that it can only be used in a certain area. They want to invest it in a specific site, a specific location, a farmer's market or store. So that really makes it difficult to expand to those rural communities, especially if we don't have a match partner in rural communities. So I'll say that that is one challenge that we see in terms of, again, just wanting to echo my previous comments on some of our rural communities don't have a farmer's market. And so while GusNIP and the Double Up Food Bucks program, when we originally rolled it out, it was designed for farmers markets, have to think about how to shift to different models that will fit our rural communities. Lots of ours, again, don't have a farmer's market, but there's a really great corner store that might be a good fit. And the thing that we see with our corner stores in our rural communities is, again, just getting some of the EBT technology up and running for them is one challenge so that they can even accept SNAP benefits, and then also getting a POS system that can, read the benefits and also distribute an incentive. I think that's an area that definitely needs more investment. And then I think our model in particular, we do work on prioritizing local produce. And so with that, we do work with our corner stores on scaling up. So whatever they start at their baseline, we try to find ways that we can connect them with local growers in the region so that we see over time they have a percentage shift in the
Thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I want to hear from Mr. Smitkamp before my time runs out.
Thank you very much. Just broaden the language. That's where we are. We want to complement. Frozen Foods wants to complement all other sources. And so we are there. We can get it to the small rural if they have the infrastructure to handle frozen. It's all about getting the language opened up to handle all forms, and then allowing us to do what we do best and get the product to the particular recipient.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really need more than 5 minutes to have this conversation. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I agree with you, General Lady. There's so much we want to do to help solve this food disparity problem. And now the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Baird, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to sit in on this important session. I really appreciate the witnesses being here. I think the expertise that you share with us really makes us better informed to try to improve these programs. And as we look at the 2023 Farm Bill, that's a real asset to us. I want to look at another little area. I think in many cases, food preparation can be just as important as the type of foods. So, we got these air fryers and so on now. So I'm interested in two things. Are there equipment that we could use that would be beneficial to people, and how many people have access to those sort of things, and then how much has education played a role in trying to help families identify a good nutrition program? So.
I don't know anything about air fryers. My wife has one, but I don't know.
I don't either, but I'd like to.
But I will tell you that education is the key. There's so many things about, the leafy green vegetables that we're talking about, right? And people just don't accept them. I think when I serve in some of the nonprofits back home, they just don't take the leafy greens and some of those things because they don't know how to prepare them. So there again, we have an access, it's already prepared for them and frozen. And so I think that is all we're trying to do is open that language up, get the availability of the infrastructure, and then naturally educate the recipients of how to do that. And I think more and more agencies are doing that and seeing that need. They are in my community.
If I may also speak to that, the SNAP educational funding goes to states, and there is no real compulsory coordination with tribal governments. If there was a $4 million allocation for FDIPR tribes in the nutrition field. So if we have those fresh products, then we want to be able to provide that type of educational training. And I think it needs to increase, or a proportion of what goes to SNAP should come a higher proportion to the tribes, or there should be mandatory coordination between the states as SNAP recipients and the FDIPR programs, because by all means, we provide that type of cooking and coursework. And by the way, several of my children have the air fryer, so.
Thank you. Ms. Moss, did you have a?
Yeah, so just to follow up to my co-panelists here, so USDA does have several programs that I think are really interesting. So one he mentioned is SNAP Education. We work very closely with our SNAP Education folks that come out of West Virginia University, very closely. They do amazing education in schools with both children and also adults. And I think there are other really great USDA-funded grant programs to help out with this. So Farm to School, for example, does farming education, but it's also nutrition education with youth, and it really helps to develop their palates.
Thank you. Anyone else? I would like to ask one more question in that regard. What are we doing in the schools, do you think, for these families? Are the children being exposed to better ways to eat and so on?
I can speak to the Farm to School program. I think the beauty of all of these programs is that there's a lot of collaboration that happens, and Farm to School is a great area where local farmers and nutrition, the SNAP Ed program can come in and teach kids about where their food's coming from. We know that we can only do so much to create local food. We also have to do work on both ends to increase education so that the demand for local food is also there. And that's where the Farm to School program is just a great way that that teaches kids about where their food comes from to increase their palates.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Well, a fun fact on that, I mean, the USDA has asked us as manufacturers to do a much more retail label so they can go on and get our website and look at education on that. You know, we're feeding 30 million children a day. So there's a lot of access out there.
Thank you. My time's out, and so I yield back.
Thank you. And now the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Brown, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Thompson for holding this hearing today. And thank you to our expert panel for being here. Your perspectives are helpful as we look ahead to the next Farm Bill. The COVID-19 pandemic put tremendous strain on our nation's food system. We saw our nation's hunger crisis expand our food supply chain challenge. And this is why I work with my colleagues to introduce the Find Food Act to meet the demand in the face of declining food donations. So, Mr. Wade, as you mentioned in your testimony, food banks are paying almost 40% more to purchase nearly the same amount of food as last year, and prices continue to rise. How would additional Tfab investments help your food bank and others across the country in the 2023 Farm Bill?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. Expanded Tfab funding would make a critical difference, particularly for food banks serving smaller communities where Tfab commodities make up a much higher percentage of the total volume of food that they distribute in those local communities. Today, food banks are experiencing a decline in the volume of federal commodities that are flowing into food banks as we revert back to baseline spending. And to offset those declines, along with declines in donated food banks are purchasing more in patterns that are just unsustainable. As I mentioned, my food bank next year will spend more than $15 million to buy food. For the first time in our history, we will source more food through our purchasing activity than we will source through federal commodities. Again, that's just not a pattern that most food banks will be able to support long term. So increased Tfab funding will help ensure that food banks have the food sourcing capacity they need to meet the demand in their local community.
Thank you. The pandemic also shed light on many of the existing barriers to access when it comes to putting food on the table. So, Mr. Wade, communities of color and rural communities often have higher rates of food insecurity, lack adequate grocery store retailers, and are often harder to reach for food distribution. What are some of the innovative distribution models your food bank uses to help serve our neighbors in need? And how can the committee better address hunger in communities of color and rural communities in the 2023 Farm Bill?
Well, I think the most important thing that we've done at my food bank to increase access is really about building partnerships with organizations on the ground level in those local communities. And that includes organizations with which we have longstanding partnerships who really understand those local communities and who have built capacity to serve those communities more effectively. It also includes organizations where we built relationships kind of on the fly in the midst of crisis during the pandemic. So we worked with a lot of schools, a lot of governmental organizations, city council leaders to host mobile distributions in urban communities, in rural communities, and everywhere in between, so that we could target parts of the region where we did not have existing food partners to get food there ordinarily. And that really helped us fill those gaps in a way that was critically important during that crisis. So mobile distribution, partnerships, and investments in capacity are really the keys to ensuring that every part of our region has access.
Well, thank you very much. I know that in my community, we have begun to partner with organizations such as DoorDash to help some of our seniors get access. And so those are innovative ideas that I hope we're doing research that could potentially have a greater impact. So an important point in closing that you touched on in your testimony that often gets lost is that TFAP is not only an important program for families, but for farmers as well. And so I just look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to address this issue. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. And now the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Finstra, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Thompson. Thank you for having this hearing, and I appreciate all your testimony. It's very useful as we look at the 2023 Farm Bill as we move forward. The 4th District in Iowa, where I'm from, my district, is made up of many small rural communities. Ms. Moss, you mentioned in your testimony that requiring some federal grants to be reimbursable has a negative impact on smaller communities. Can you speak on this more, what your thoughts are when you noted that?
Certainly. So almost all federal grants are reimbursable.
Yep.
So you have to spend the money, wait 4 weeks to 4 months to get reimbursed. And this can be, $20,000. It could be $200,000. I was actually just on the phone with one of our food bank directors who had to spend $600,000 and is still waiting on reimbursement 6 months later. It's really challenging to maintain that kind of a cash flow if you're a small organization.
So I fully agree with you. So what is your solution? Especially, we have all these small locations in my communities and stuff. So what could we do to create a better system when it comes to reimbursement or getting away from reimbursement?
Certainly, there are, in my mind, two options. So one, and some grant programs do allow this, they allow you to apply for an advance. But those are only very known expenses, and you have to apply, or you have to supply a very detailed list of what those expenses are. The lady behind me nodding her head is about to tell you how much of a pain that is and how much human capital it takes to make that happen. The other option is do what a lot of philanthropic organizations do, and they will cut a check annually or every 6 months for what you said you would need for that period.
So that'd be like a grant application.
Yes, essentially. And in a lot of the programs we're talking about are grants, GusNIP,
Yes. Yes.
HFFI.
So with that, Mrs. Moss, which programs that you discussed in your testimony are most beneficial to rural America? Again, my district, I'm just thinking about, are there programs that are better serving rural communities and small communities than others? And how can we maximize that intent? We just sort of talked about the intent of reimbursements, but I'm looking at things being equitable and the impact. What is your thoughts?
So certainly, Healthy Food Financing Initiative is fantastic in rural communities because rural communities are experiencing the big box stores pulling out. So that program really helps to have retail close by. GusNIP, of course, is a fantastic program. And this is not part of the discussion today, but AMS has the Farmers Market and Local Food promotional programs, also fantastic Farm Bill programs to really maximize that local agriculture. I think one of the biggest things is match. Rural communities just don't have the funding that cities have. Philanthropy doesn't invest in rural communities.
No, exactly. I tend to agree with that. Do you look at a private-public partnership, meaning that would there be a way that we should incentivize, I think of my larger grocery chains, things like that, where we can give them some incentivization to help our local food banks and things like that?
I think my colleague to the left would probably be better suited to speak to that, and I think there are a lot of partnerships with food banks.
Well, there are certainly, the majority of food banks in the country are located in smaller communities. And in the state of Iowa, where there are several outstanding food banks serving that state that are doing a lot of innovative things to grow capacity in the state. I think we have a lot of incentives in place to encourage large grocery store chains to donate and to support food banks and other charitable feeding programs. And certainly just enhancing those incentives can continue to grow our partnerships. I think probably the biggest thing to contemplate in increasing access in local communities that are in the food bank serving smaller communities is one, to beat a dead horse, Tfab funding is really critical. So in my food bank, large metro area, 30% maybe of our food comes from federal commodities. In a smaller community, like those serving in Iowa, it'll be over 50% coming from federal commodities.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I just look at, my in-laws, we have a large cattle operation, a hog operation, and stuff like that. And I think there's always, to me, opportunities, not only with grocery, but also the agricultural producers on how we could partner up and help food banks and stuff like that. Thank you. I'm out of time. I yield back.
Thank you. And now we recognize the gentlewoman from Maine, Miss Pingree, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for holding this important hearing, and thank you to all of our panelists who've you do wonderful work, all of you, and I really appreciate it. And you're really helping to inform our committee as we look into the future of the Farm Bill and other funding issues that we have to deal with. So let me just start with Mr. Wade. Thank you for the great work you do at the food bank. And I think in the last answer, you said you hate to keep beating a dead horse on the Tfab program, but as far as I'm concerned, you can keep beating that drum as long as you want, because I am particularly concerned about what's going to happen when we revert to pre-pandemic levels. And you've talked about that quite a bit. So thank you for emphasizing that. I just want to ask a somewhat more obscure question, but something we've heard about. We're served by the Good Shepherd Food Bank here in Maine, and they do an incredible job. But they brought up to us some challenges with the Emergency Food Assistance Program, where the implementation guidelines limit participating agencies to 501c3 nonprofits when their partner networks now include schools, hospitals, and municipalities. I'm just wondering if you've had similar experiences and if you have any suggestions about that challenge.
Well, we certainly work a lot with schools in our community, and we work with a variety of other entities. As I mentioned, during the pandemic, we worked with a number of municipal governmental leaders to host food distributions, and doing that did create some complexity in how we distributed Tfab products and other federally funded types of products. And so increasing flexibilities is something we would always support. It just helps us move faster to get food to where it is needed. Obviously, we have to balance that against the need for accountability and the need for organizations that have good operating practices, know what they're doing to handle food safely, and that can adhere to other kinds of standards. But we think we can accomplish that while still maintaining greater flexibility that allows the whole system to move faster.
Well, thank you for that. Maybe that's something we could look into the future in terms of that flexibility. So that's an important point, I think. Dr. Gruner, you again are also doing great work, and thank you for all of your testimony today. I'm really interested in the locally sourced side of this. I think particularly now with the supply chain issues that we've worried about and are working on, the more we can do to expand those local networks is really important. And in previous farm bills, I've worked on the language that allowed SNAP beneficiaries to shop at farmers markets like everyone else. So that's very important to me. I know there have been some concerns raised about insufficient access in rural communities, which is kind of ironic since in the rural communities, that's where we're producing so much of the food. I come from a very rural state. And I know you've already talked about this a little bit, but could you have anything else to add about the challenges that we could address or successes that we can build on when we're prioritizing locally grown food through GusNIP?
Yeah, I think in addition, GusNIP having the model that prioritizes local food, I think is really important. But I also think that when looking at all the different programs that are in Farm Bill, I think there's a really untapped resource with our small local producers, especially in our rural areas. So smaller programs like the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, which utilizes local produce, is another great complementary program that, again, I think just having an additional investment in that program and additional admin dollars could really help to expand and purchase that product from local producers, especially sometimes in our smaller farms. It's really hard to get larger distribution trucks in those areas. So being able to have smaller programs that can navigate and source from our farms and our rural communities can be really helpful. So I see all of these programs as really being complementary. And I know it was already mentioned, but LAMP is a great way that can help with that coordination of all the programs, because I think all of these programs play a role. So I see that really looking at ways to invest in our small local producers as a solution.
Thank you for that. And thank you for always mentioning LAMP. That's been a really important part of the work that we've been doing in enhancing that. And so we appreciate hearing that it's working. I'm going to run out of time, but Ms. Moss, thank you too for your work. And I was really grateful to hear your story about helping the family with the diabetic child, and that's another reason to work on the produce prescription program, which isn't part of our conversation today. But again, a way to tailor making sure that people get the food and nutrition that they need for their families. So I'm out of time, but I'll yield back. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
And thank you. And now the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Carmack, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, and thank you to all our witnesses for appearing before the committee today. Definitely an important topic, and so I'm just going to jump right in. Mr. Wade, your testimony alludes to Feeding America working to, quote, end hunger with the food, people, and big ideas required to ensure our neighbors have the nourishment they need to lead healthy and productive lives, end quote. Feeding America has been around for more than 40 years and has seen increased participation in programming, receives billions with a B from the federal government, and spends millions of dollars on advertising. What started as a clearinghouse has really become a monopoly in the distribution space. Can you walk me through the big ideas the organization is currently thinking through to reduce reliance on food assistance and indeed help families lead healthy and productive lives?
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that question, Congresswoman. I think it's really important to start with really understanding what food insecurity is and looks like. The vast majority of folks who identify as food insecure, who get food through our network, who participate in federal programs like SNAP, they aren't a part of these programs permanently. And in fact, whether you look at SNAP or you look at participation in feeding programs like those operated by Feeding America, the duration that people spend in these programs is generally less than a year's worth of time. And then they get back on their feet after they've navigated a crisis and are able to provide for themselves. We have been around for 40 years. We have expanded food distribution over those 40 years. And I think we've done that to great end to help ensure that people get out of crisis faster and that our response to crisis is more effective and durable. The innovations that I think you're asking about relate to our ability to enhance the quality of the food that we're distributing compared to what we were doing 40 years ago. More than half of the food that we distributed during the pandemic was either fresh or frozen. We've increased access to nutrition education during that time. We've increased partnerships with workforce development programs to help people get access to better careers over time. And we've increased partnerships with other kinds of service providers in the healthcare space to improve health outcomes over time. So I think what we have seen through the investment that we've been privileged to enjoy from both federal sources and the private sector is that as pressure has increased over the last 40 years on low to moderate income families, that we have helped those families have better life outcomes than they certainly would have otherwise.
Well, and Ms. Wade, I'll submit a follow-up question for the record, but I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to jump into my second question. Feeding America states that for every one meal provided, SNAP provides 9. Does it make more sense to shift the hundreds of millions spent on Tfab to SNAP or incentive programming, each of which provide choice, flexibility, and more immediate solutions for families in need?
So we think the safety net that's provided by the combination of these nutrition programs are complementary and important to be taken together. SNAP is a much larger program, and the spending on SNAP is about 20 times what it is on Tfab. Certainly, SNAP is a critical part of the response. That said, Tfab is a unique program that really helps respond to opportunities in the agricultural market to take advantage of surplus food and get it to people who need it, while also supporting America's farmers. So we don't think canceling that program out would continue to support our farmers in the way that Tfab does today. And we also think it would be a net loss to the families that we serve collectively in the hunger relief space. I'd also say, you mentioned a monopoly in the feeding programs. It's important to remember that Feeding America works with 60,000 community-based programs across the country, 2/3 of which are faith-based organizations, probably a significant percentage of which are led by BIPOC leaders, and a significant number of which serve majority minority communities. So,
and Mr. Wade, my time has expired, and so I want to be sensitive to the chairman's time. I would just like to follow up with, I do believe there is a licensing fee that many of those entities have to use in order to use the Feeding America name. But with that, I yield back.
Thank you. And now the gentlewoman from New Hampshire, Ms. Custer, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Wade, for bringing up the health benefits. I think Dr. Schreier and I both serve on both the Health Subcommittee on Energy and Commerce and on Agriculture. And I'd love to have a joint hearing at some point about the health benefits of these important issues and programs in the nutrition title of the Farm Bill, not just SNAP, but these nutrition programs that take a holistic approach to food security and the safety net, but also to helping families address health issues, the most expensive health issues, diabetes, heart disease, obesity. All of that can benefit from the work that you're doing, not just to mitigate hunger, but help stabilize families and help them address their health and well-being, eating more fruits and vegetables, eating those leafy greens that we've talked about this morning. That safety net is more critical than ever as we recover our supply chains from the height of the pandemic and navigate the food and fuel shortages stemming from Russia's unconscionable invasion of Ukraine. We know that the result of the pandemic and the war are higher prices at the grocery store and leading to greater reliance on food banks and community resources at a time when they're already stretched thin. And so it's so important today that we talk about how do we reduce costs, but also how do we provide that important safety net. And for me, a big part of this, as Representative Pingree brought up, is having food grown closer to where it's consumed, because we can bring down those high transportation costs, the trucking, the shipping, et cetera. Mr. Wade, you noticed in your testimony that Congress helped fill the gap during the pandemic by authorizing $1 billion in additional funding for the Tfab, Emergency Food Assistance Program, but we're far from out of the woods. Just like the experience in Georgia, I've heard from the Community Action Program in New Hampshire that handles our Tfab contract about the challenges of acquiring the items they need to feed families as food and transportation prices rise. Mr. Wade, could you elaborate on how the additional Tfab allocation helps sustain your operations during the peak of COVID, and why the mandatory funding level needs to be increased in the next Farm Bill?
So simply put, we would not have been able to meet the need in our local community were it not for the extraordinary federal response in expanding access to commodities. The demand would have just far exceeded the supply available from donated sources of food, and we certainly could not have closed the gap with our own purchasing resources. What we know going forward is that demand right now is growing again due to the pressures that families are facing with higher costs for food and gas and other basic needs. We do not think that is a challenge that will last only a few months. We think it will be with us for a longer period, and for food banks and other organizations to continue to respond to their community and meet the needs in their community. We need more food. Being able to provide all that food with our own purchasing resources is not a sustainable solution, and it might be something we can do over the course of a year or two, but having a higher level of mandatory funding for Tfab in the next farm bill will help ensure a predictable, robust supply of food for emergency food providers over the long term as we continue to work to meet the need for increased levels of demand for food assistance.
Thank you. Now let me turn to the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, which I believe is an incredible win-win program for vulnerable seniors and for our local farmers. Dr. Gruner, I appreciated in your testimony, you called this program tiny but mighty. The connection this program allows seniors to make with fresh local food, as well as other community resources, are invaluable. And it also supports our small farm economics, just like the farmers in my district in New Hampshire. So, Dr. Gruner, we've heard the program is drastically oversubscribed nationally. Can you tell us roughly how many more seniors you could be serving with more funding in the program?
Hi, Representative. I realize your time has expired. I'm happy to follow up in written comments if that would be helpful.
I apologize.
We appreciate that
Carefully tending the
so
clock.
much.
I yield back.
No problem. And now the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Wade, you mentioned the partnerships with farmers to minimize waste of products. Do you have any ideas for how a similar partnership could be created for any of the USDA programs in order to create more access to fresh local products while utilizing the excess products of farmers, how that could be integrated?
Well, I think, Congressman, good to see you again, and thank you for the question. I think Tfab is already engaging a wide variety of producers as suppliers to the Tfab program. I think work can certainly be done to broaden participation of producers in the existing Tfab program. And we certainly encourage AMS to do that as part of their ongoing activity. We also think that there are opportunities to invest in the capacity of smaller local producers, including socially disadvantaged producers, so that they can participate on an ongoing basis in Tfab contracts more effectively. And then there are always opportunities to take lessons learned from programs like the Farmers to Families Food Box program to find ways to respond with greater agility and speed to market opportunities to get that high-quality product where it's needed when it's needed.
Well, your comments are important here, and your input's important because we'll be working on a new farm bill in the next Congress, and we want to see how these non-SNAP USDA nutrition programs are working, and in the improvements that we need to make to those programs to make sure that we are doing everything we can do to make sure folks get good, nutritious food. This is a question for all of our folks who are here testifying today. Much of the testimony we have received thus far by the 117th Congress, including today's, includes calls to strengthen programs. And of course, when I hear calls for strengthening, I immediately think of we need additional funding. And for our witnesses today, seeing Title IV alone will cost taxpayers more than $1.1 trillion over the next 10 years. How do you reconcile that with your programmatic recommendations? And we'll start off with you, Mr. Smitkamp, I believe, if I'm reading that correct.
Well, I guess if I understand the question, how do we recognize when the cost of fuel is going up, how we can supply all the things that we need to do? But I think in the frozen food world, we are probably the most efficient folks to be able to produce a pound, a serving that needs to go to these communities. So with that, I believe the frozen food industry is doing their job to continue to eliminate waste, give a value, and complement what fresh is, and when they run out or when they have oversupply. So I think in the frozen food industry, we are trying to do, and with regard to the Tfab money, when we are allotted a bonus buy when there is a excessive crop, wherever it might be, whether it's peaches, strawberries, or berries, it comes in and it definitely shows on the farmer side, which we're all very important, that the farmer side, it raises the fresh market up to a nice parity. Right. So the Tfab program is good.
Good, and so it sounds like that your threats are external things you can't control, and so that's going to be part of your ask. Ms. Moss, what do you have for us as far as what you can do to?
In terms of a rationale
right.
for the line item. You know, I think in my lifetime, I've seen a consolidation of agriculture. You know, there's a lot of big corporate farms in America, and we don't see nearly as many small farmers as we did when I was a kid. I'm not that old. And so I think that's for a couple of reasons. One of it is farming is hard work. Farmers don't get a fair shake. You know, there's not been a lot of investment in our local farmers, particularly those that are producing food. Right. And so I would say that this is really an investment in your local agriculture, which is really a homeland security issue as well.
I'm sorry, I'm out of time, and Mr. Wade, if you will provide us something to that question to us in writing, I appreciate it. Sir, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. And now the gentleman from California, Mr. Garbahal, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses testifying today. The work you all do in administering these very important programs is essential to providing people across the country with nutritious food and preventing millions from going hungry. As we prepare for work on the next Farm Bill, hearing from you all is extremely important to these programs so that we can best serve the people who most need them in our planning. Mr. Wade, USDA recently launched the Tfab Fresh Produce Box program to help address the lack of fresh produce available through the Tfab food list. This serves to complement the fresh produce food banks are purchasing privately. Can you talk about the importance of ensuring clients have options to access a wide variety of produce when they visit a food bank?
Thank you for the question, Congressman, and it's a really important consideration. You know, the families that we serve in particular lack access to fresh produce. It's harder for them to access because it's not as available in the grocery store serving their communities, or because it's just not something they can afford and certainly can't afford to see go to waste. So having good variety is critical to our meeting their nutrition needs. We in the nation's food banks have dramatically grown our distribution of fresh produce over the last decade. And we still have a lot of opportunity to increase the volume and variety of produce that we're distributing. Having more options for where we source that produce, for the format and packaging of what that produce shows up to our food banks looking like, so that we can give clients options, allows them to have more choices to find products that meet the needs of their families, the preferences of their families, which is what any of us want when we go to the grocery store. And so that variety is really critical to increase access and utilization of produce for food insecure families.
Thank you. Dr. Gruner, it is great to hear about the success Arizona has had in implementing the GusNIP program. I'm very supportive of helping SNAP recipients get more bang for their buck. Can you walk me through some of the challenges you faced when implementing this program and how Congress can best support the Nutrition Incentive Hub to make sure that the needed resources are available to other organizations?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think the first thing is just when we have any site that is available, it's getting them onboarded with EBT equipment. Not all of our farmers markets are eligible sites that are receiving local produce are able to receive SNAP benefits. So I think that's where we see the biggest amount of our technical support right now is just making sure that they have EBT processing equipment and are part of that registration. And then I think ultimately is just outreach and giving, making sure that participants know that they're eligible and they can find a location. So I think we see a significant effort in our outreach and finding creative solutions for reaching lots of different families across our state. So I think those are the two areas where we see significant challenges. We're very lucky that the evaluation component, again, is with that Nutrition Incentive Hub. That's really helped to streamline and create a really comprehensive evaluation. So I think in the next couple of years, we're going to have some really great data from all of our states across the nation to pull together. So I think having that uplifted to a broader approach is going to be really helpful as well. So we're not having to do all of the evaluation from scratch. So I think those are just a couple of the ways that we see some challenges that we faced.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. And now the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Schreier, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to all of our witnesses. Today, I'd like to focus on the Emergency Food Assistance Program, or TFAP. Over the past few years, we've all had many discussions about the issues at food banks, huge increases in demand, like you pointed to in your testimonies, long lines, distribution challenges, sometimes more donations than food banks can even handle because of storage limitations, refrigeration space. And I think that this has all really ignited an important and urgent conversation about what our food systems writ large should look like. I want to first just highlight the incredible work of two organizations in my district. First, the Bonnie Lake Food Bank is charting a new path forward for the operation of food banks and food pantries. They saw a 700% increase in customers due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And because of that, they began developing a new food insecurity project that focuses on increasing access for the surrounding area by building in consideration of convenience for customers and transportation and help with language barriers. And they're also supplementing the TFAP foods that they receive with weekly purchases of fresh produce from nearby farms to create a food bank that really looks and feels more like a market. The second that I'd like to really highlight is Cascadia Produce, a food aggregator and distributor in Auburn, Washington. In response to some of the systemic barriers preventing small and underserved farmers from accessing market opportunities, Cascadia Produce is championing a new model of coordinated collaboration to act as an incubator and create a path for underserved food businesses to bid and execute future contracts on their own. And this work is ensuring that communities throughout Washington are fed by local farmers in a way that creates jobs, sustains local farms, and strengthens the entire food network. I wanted to share these examples because I think this is the kind of work that TFAP can and should help to support. And federal investment through TFAP and the other feeding programs we're discussing today really has the potential to act as a catalyst for creating circular local food systems that support our family farms while also feeding our communities. So that's why I'm working on legislation that would improve our food and agricultural supply chain by modifying the procurement side of TFAP to provide emergency feeding organizations with better access to healthy, locally grown food. Mr. Wade, I have a question for you. In meeting with stakeholders throughout my district in Washington State, one thing I've heard time and again is the need for work to be really locally led. People have told me that the pandemic food box program, for example, however well intended, and it was really well intended, demonstrated that the federal agencies just don't have the on-the-ground local knowledge and connections to adapt to the need of every different community and different food banks with different capabilities. So I wanted to ask you, Mr. Wade, about your view here. How did the Atlanta Community Food Bank work to get food, as you said in your testimony, to the people who need it, when and where they need it during the pandemic?
Well, I think, and thank you for the question, the key to our success in being responsive to the needs of the community is that we have built over more than 40 years of practice, really deep relationships on the ground in communities across our region. And so we are there to engage, educate, and empower the community to fight hunger, which means we're providing resources and platforms, including food, including investments in transportation capacity, refrigeration capacity, so that folks who really understand what need looks like in their local neighborhoods have what they need to really take care of their neighbors. And those grassroots relationships we were able to really lean on and activate to an even greater degree during crisis, so that we could stand up mobile distributions in places that weren't being served as well as they needed to be, so that we could change operating models on the fly to respond to needs in those local communities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate those relationships. That's why the legislation I'm working on now is really going to get funding, hopefully, to the states to get down to the most local communities to do exactly what you've done and be able to purchase local food farmed locally to food banks and solve hunger. Thanks very much. I yield back.
The gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all our witnesses for participating in this very important hearing, especially on the verge of, on the evening before the Farm Bill coming up in 2023. So I appreciate you discussing something that's going to be and is very important to my district on the Central Coast of California. Recently, I led a bipartisan letter with my colleague Chantel Brown and the late Congressman Don Young, requesting an additional $900 million to support the Temporary Emergency Food Assistance Program, TFAP, as we have been discussing, obviously identifying the urgent need to resource this vital program. I'm continuing, though, to hear from food banks in my district about how critical TFAP is so that they can meet their demand for food. I think we all know that food banks, as well as families, are being squeezed by the cost of food, fuel, and other basic needs, especially at this time. Mr. Wade, I'm going to hit you up again. I know you've been busy in this hearing, as I've been seeing, but I'm going to rely on your expertise to answer this next question. Go ahead and describe what the federal drop in commodities has meant to food banks and what can be done in the upcoming Farm Bill to ensure food banks, who literally are the final backstop in the federal government's safety net, what can be done to ensure that they're adequately resourced?
Well, thank you, Congressman, for the question. As I've indicated throughout this hearing, food banks right now are responding to the decline in federal commodities by buying more food with private resources. We are expecting a 40% decline in the volume of Tfab food in the coming year collectively. And in response to that, we're trying to fill the gap with purchased food because we're also seeing challenges on the in terms of donated food due to other issues in the supply chain. For my food bank, as an example, Prior to COVID, we were spending approximately $6 million a year in total food purchasing activity. In the coming year, we will spend more than $15 million on buying food. So that's, 2.5 times what we were buying prior to the pandemic. My food bank, compared to most food banks in the network, is very well resourced. And even for us, if we were to do that indefinitely, it would become very challenging to sustain our operations. So Tfab, expanded Tfab funding, and we're recommending $450 million in annual mandatory Tfab funding in the next Farm Bill, would help reduce that dependency on buying food and give us more resources to invest in programming, to invest in trucking, to invest in grant making to our partners, so that we can really build our distribution capacity to get food where it's needed.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Dr. Gruner, I got two for you. Obviously, you understand the importance of using SNAP, especially obviously to buy fresh fruits and vegetables, but also at farmers markets. And unfortunately, there are some barriers there that SNAP beneficiaries have in using their benefits at farmers markets. What are some of those barriers, and how can we make it a little bit easier for people to use their SNAP benefits at farmers markets?
I'll take a perspective from our rural areas. Just having EBT equipment that connects and that can read cards, so connectivity, broadband, I think is where we definitely need investment for our rural communities so that they can have SNAP equipment that can read EBT cards so that beneficiaries can even participate in the program or even use SNAP benefits at farmers markets. So I'd say that's one of the primary things that we see, just an additional investment and a need for technology support in our rural communities. I'm sorry, you had one more, so I want to just give you opportunity.
Thank you. Real quickly on the GusSNP, how can we utilize online SNAP to improve the experience and increase access to fresh fruits and vegetables through the use of GusSNP?
I'd love to submit some more. It's a complex answer, but I will just say, thinking about online SNAP has to be part of a solution for how we think about modernization, and using the Farm Bill to really lay that groundwork is really important. So it has to be part of how we think about it.
Outstanding. Thank you. Thanks to the witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
And now the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Capter, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What an outstanding set of witnesses you've gathered today. And I want to thank you all on behalf of the people of Ohio that I represent for the tremendous job that you do in representing all of America. Your experience will influence us in drafting this Farm Bill. And I wanted to just mention that in another bill Congress passed, which is the Infrastructure and Jobs Bill, there's funding there for energy systems, new energy systems. Many of the food banks and even farmers markets that we operate around the country could be much more efficiently run if they had modern power, and even some generator backups for some of our freezers and some of our food banks. I would urge you to look at that bill and put together you'd have to give it a name, a food network plan for the regions that you represent, whether it's West Virginia, California, Georgia, wherever it might be, and take a look at that bill. And also on broadband, which Dr. Gruner just mentioned. There's funding in that bill that could really help you do the work that you're attempting to do, and I thank you on behalf of the country. I'll be real quick and say my goal in participating in the Farm Bill drafting will be to strengthen local agriculture in this country. And I've heard that from many of you, and another goal of mine is to improve nutrition and the elements of that so the younger generation understands what it is to grow food and harvest a crop. We're far from that in our country, and it's hurting us. It's hurting us as a country. So I'm very interested in that. Mr. Besaw, I listened, he used the term shorten the food chain. I know he's up there on the computer somewhere, but I'm somebody that wants to, and Dr. Schreier, Representative Schreier, used the term circular food system, and I just am sitting here applauding. So I believe that what American farmers grows America. And when they get harmed, boy, we're in trouble. And too much of our food is imported. I grew up in a family market. We used to go over to Indiana, pick up the best melons in the world. The other day I went to shop at a produce market, and the melon came from Honduras. There are climate refugees from Honduras. I look at that and I say to myself, am I taking food from someone in Honduras? I don't really know, but I want to support local agriculture in this country. I'm asking myself the following questions. Mr. Wade, do food banks in your network have the ability to contract with local farmers in order to move product to your food bank? I don't know if you're authorized to do that. I'd like to know that. I'll ask these questions very quickly. Dr. Gruner, I'd like to ask you, in terms of the Senior Farmers Market Coupon Program, the nutrition program, it is so popular. Why does it only function in maybe one congressional district per state in this country? And number three, how do we encourage local schools to get food from local farmers? How do we move into those school nutrition contracts? What can we do in the Farm Bill in that regard? So anybody that wants to address any one of those three, I'm real interested in your answers. Thank you.
Well, I can quickly answer the first question you asked me. We do source purchased produce from local farmers. The point I would emphasize, though, for you all to consider is the local producers, including socially disadvantaged producers in our region. What they really want is access to markets and customers, right? And so working with food banks is great for them, but more importantly, they need customers, and the key enabler for them is going to be access to capital and investment in their capacity. And so in addition to helping folks participate more regularly in the Tfab program as suppliers, the more we can do through a variety of programs with the Farm Bill, with FSA programs, is help these smaller producers get access to capital to invest in their capacity so that they can build customer relationships.
I agree with you, Mr. Wade. I want to cut you off, but in terms of what we can do through a Farm Bill, we can empower our local food banks to buy from local farmers, because our local farmers are the major donors to our food banks, at least where I come from. And I'm going, hey, how come they can't get a contract to grow cucumbers and tomatoes and so forth and move those into the food banks? But it's my understanding that that isn't so easily done in current programs. I don't know if anyone else wishes to comment on that, but I did ask two other questions. One about how we can improve the ability for local schools to buy local from farmers and producers, and then in terms of the Senior Farmers Market Program, how can we make it a national program rather than diddle around in one congressional district in half the states?
If I don't mind, time has expired, but that was a very important question, and we would appreciate it if each of you could respond to Ms. Capter in person. And I thank you for that, Ms. Capter, and for your 100%.
I need to tell you a couple of things, but go ahead and do what you got to do and hurry back.
Mr. Lawson. Oh, okay. Mr. Lawson.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've had some difficulty on the computer, but now I think I'm in. First, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Thompson for holding this a great hearing. And hunger is a serious issue among seniors. According to the recent data from Feeding America, nearly 5.2 million seniors were food insecure during 2020, which is incredible. Dr. Gerner, you had heard that the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program is drastically oversubscribed nationally. Can you tell us roughly how many more seniors you could serve with more funding? Are they gonna?
Yeah, Mr. Lawson, can you repeat the question and who you directed it to?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't know whether you could hear me, but it was directed to Dr. Gerner. I was talking about the 5.2 million seniors that was food insecure in 2020. And my question was, we have heard that seniors farmer market nutritional program is drastically over subscribed nationally. And I was asking Doctor, can you tell us roughly how many more seniors you could serve with more funding?
Thank you, Representative. I think where we see opportunity is we also need an additional investment in admin. When we talk to some of our neighboring states, I think where we see commonality is a lot of us are limited in how much outreach we can do. And so speaking of the program only being in a couple of congressional districts, that's really because the personnel time is so strapped, especially in a state like Arizona. We're 6th largest state. And so getting to all of our rural communities and getting out and transportation there and getting programs up and running there, technical support there, and then also just distributing coupons or whatever the incentive model there is quite challenging. And so I think additional admin would really help us to expand our capacity. In Arizona, we served just over almost 1,400 seniors last year, but we're also capped at our Csfp program is, as that's like one of the entry points. We have created an additional way that we can do an eligibility waiver, but essentially it's really tied closely with our Csfp. So I think that, these programs work really closely together, but I think ultimately we have farmers that are available and willing to offer product. We just need personnel and resources to be able to expand into other communities and reach more seniors. So I'd say that we don't have a necessarily number I can say, but I would say just additional admin time would help not just Arizona, but some of our neighboring states as well to really expand to reach some of those hard to reach areas of all of our states.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Wade, thank you for all the work that you're doing in Georgia distributing food during these difficult times. I'm very interested in Atlanta Community Food Bank work and with housing, health services, job training, and other critical support. The kind of wraparound services you provide can change lives during this time. So there any restriction on Tfab that prevent you from offering more support services?
There are no restrictions in Tfab that prevent us from offering more services. The way we typically do that is by partnering with other organizations that are expert in those areas. We're really good at moving food. We're really good at building partnerships on the grassroots level and investing in the capacity of other organizations. Those other organizations are really good at job training or other kind of healthcare type of provision of services, and we really leverage their expertise. I think the key thing that could always make a difference is expanding eligibility for Tfab. That right now, about 57% of the people we serve earn too much money to be eligible for Tfab. And so we could serve more of those people more food and do more work for them if that eligibility threshold were lifted to a higher number.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My time is running out and I yield back.
All right, thank you very much. And now we've reached the end of our hearing. And we want to, first of all, thank you. And then we're going to have some comments from the ranking member, and then my closing statement as well. So first, Mr. Kyle Wade, President and CEO of Atlanta's Community Food Bank, we want to say thank you. And we are committed to helping secure this additional $450 million. I believe this committee, and I think you've heard from them, share this goal as well. And with the help of my good friend, the ranking member, I believe we'll be able to do it. And now, Mr. Gary Bezar, Director of the Menominee Tribal Department of Agriculture and Food Systems, we want to say thank you to your excellent testimony. And to Dr. Jesse Gruner, Director of Community Innovation, Pinnacle Prevention, thank you very much. And, excuse me, for Ms. Spencer Moss, Executive Director of the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition, thank you for your very informative testimony. And Mr. William Smitkamp, President and CEO of the Wamana Frozen Foods, on behalf of the American Frozen Food Institute. Thank you for your excellent testimony and presenting that very important perspective from our frozen foods. They play a very important role. And now with that, before I give my my closing statement, Mr. Ranking Member, I recognize you.
All right, Chairman, thank you so much. Each of the witnesses, thank you for bringing your experience, your expertise, and obviously your passion in this realm. Nutrition is incredibly, the Title IV of the Farm Bill, the nutrition title, is a very important title, as important as any other title in the Farm Bill. And quite frankly, this is about, I think Title IV for me summarizes what I've come to identify as a rural value, maybe an urban value too, or I've never lived in urban America, so I'm not sure. But a rural value is neighbors help neighbors in need. And part of that is making sure that we look at it, I think, from a broad perspective. Certainly, as was pointed out in a lot of the testimony I heard today, it's recognized that financial distress, poverty, whatever we want to call it, financial challenge is transitory. You know, people enter in and they're either enter out. You know, I don't think we'll ever end poverty, but the goal is to help people stay there for a short period of time when they find themselves in difficult financial situations, whether it's because of nothing that they did or, quite frankly, bad decisions, whatever would put them in that. And so I think that's why not only making sure that folks are getting access to nutrition, I think nutrition comes in many different ways, frozen, fresh. I don't get too hung up on how things are packaged. But in addition to that, I think we have an obligation here to make sure that we are helping people effectively move out of poverty, out of financial distress, to where the point that they don't need these programs. And that's why we have the SNAP education programs. That's why we have the education, call it training, although I will say the ranking member in the Education and Workforce Committee would take argument with that, because she says we train dogs and we educate people, and I don't argue with her, so I'm okay with that. And we have great programs to do that. We reauthorize the Perkins Act and educational labor, so career and technical education. We have great opportunities. We expanded apprenticeships. So we have different ways to move people out of poverty, and we need our partners who are there to help people land softly, let's say, when they find themselves in financial distress, to get the proper nutrition they need, to help us be partners to move these folks so that they can realize the American dream. Because the American dream is not being stuck in financially difficult circumstances, obviously. That this country offers more than that. I think we also have to be looking, and that was part of my opening remarks, of what puts people into poverty. These inflation prices, which I think are self-inflicted at this point. When you look at energy policy, when you look at regulatory policy, it's just incredible where inflation has come to over 8%, a new record just this past week. And so we need, in terms of us, members of Congress, we need to be looking at what can we do in order to correct the course of the policies we've seen over the past couple of years, that lead people into those poverty circumstances. So we have a stunning statistic, and I'm going to round off numbers. I apologize if I get it wrong by a decimal point, but there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 11.2 jobs open and available in this country today. That's more than maybe any time in our lifetime. And unless I'm incorrect, I believe there's about 11 million people that have been on the SNAP program. And that's the able-bodied adults that do not have dependent children or, quite frankly, parents, that need care at home, because those folks need to be dedicated to doing that. And these are able-bodied folks. And so we got a lot of work ahead of us, actually, and I really appreciate the role that you all play, primarily in the nutrition space, but quite frankly, those, you participate in the programs where we also put an emphasis into the education component to helping people move out of those financially distressed circumstances to greater opportunity, which is that's basically the only thing this country promises each and every one of us. So, Chairman, thanks so much for this hearing and your leadership.
And thank you, Ranking Member, for your leadership as well. You are my partner on this committee. You and I have worked together on many things, and I appreciate that, and certainly none greater than making sure that we feed the American people. That is the number one objective of our Agriculture Committee, and I appreciate our partnership. And I just want to say again and echo a few of the things that the Ranking Member mentioned as well. Our first priority is what we've been in here talking about, but we're also faced with numerous challenges, and none more than the statistical evidence that Mr. Kyle Wade presented in terms of 40% down in terms of need. That is almost half of what we're doing. We've got to increase. We've been hit with COVID-19. We're hit with challenges all the way through. Many of our veterans are going hungry, and that just breaks my heart for any of our American citizens from going hungry. But Lord knows those that have put their lives on the line for us are reaching pinnacles of homelessness and food deserts. Excuse me. Sometimes the chill in this room just gives me an aggravated cough, so I appreciate you all working with me on that during this session. But I can't tell you how grateful we are. And you have reinforced, I think you've heard from the feedback on from the members of this committee, both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side. This is one thing, one issue that has bipartisan support, feeding our nation. And so I mean that sincerely, Mr. Wade. We are going to get you and this nation that $450 million that is needed in this farm bill. We are committed to doing that, and I think and I feel confident that we have the collective power to get it done. and all of the other recommendations that each of you have mentioned. We can get it done. All we have to do is work together in a bipartisan way. That is the way you get things done. In my whole career, people say I've done great work, but I've done great bipartisan work. And we Democrats and Republicans are going to work together to make this the absolute best farm bill we've ever had. And we've had a bunch of many of them, but we want to keep improving. And so I just want to thank you. And before I close out, I want to thank my wonderful staff. They have put together a wonderful hearing here. Would you mind giving my staff a good round of applause? These are the people that do the work. And so I thank you for that. And I believe I have to do a little homework here before I adjourn. Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any question posed by a member. With that, this hearing of the Committee on Agriculture in the House of Representatives is adjourned. Thank you all. And God bless each of you.